Welcome to Unpacking the Athlete podcast, hosted by yours truly, Rob Martin. Welcome to Unpacking the Athlete, a podcast dedicated to diving deep into what makes athletes who they are. Today's guest has influenced so many people in the state of Michigan to get on a mountain bike. He has been successful on the road bike, winning road races, gravel bike races, mountain bike races, and fat bike races throughout his career. He has even won endurance races, including one of the toughest, the Margie 100. He is also a Michigan legend on the bike. Our guest today is Matt Acker. Welcome, Matt. Glad to have you on.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rob.
I got the first question, and again, this is a kind of an off-the-wall, maybe a funny question. If you had to race a tandem race with Jenny, and it had to be a 200-mile mountain bike race, which course would you pick to race it on? A double Leadville, a double Margie, or the Yak Attack minus 48 miles? Are you aware of what the Yak Attack is?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
I'd go with double Margie.
Double Margie, and what's the reasoning behind why you picked that?
I like the scenery better. Leadville's all right, but Margie's like a place we feel like at home up there. So if I'm going to be somewhere for a really long time, I'd rather be around people I want to hang out with.
I agree with the scenery. It's absolutely beautiful up there. Can you paint a picture of Margie this year? How the weather was, the temperature, how the race went? Were you in with a big group, a small group, and how did it end?
The weather, leading up to the race, it was a bit rainy, wet out. And so in the morning it was pretty foggy, but it was actually the warmest start I think we've ever had for that race, which was pleasant because you could just start in long or short sleeves and not be freezing. And it's kind of the classic start for any race, whether it's 10 miles or 1,000 miles. A bunch of people start really hard, probably a lot harder than they should. And then the minute you get to like the first wet technical area, it just kind of spreads out. My style for that race is always just to ride my own pace. If somebody wants to go in front of me, I don't really care. Here and there, I'll push it a little bit, but I'm not like going to purposefully ride like way harder in any one spot than any other spot because it's at least a 10-hour event. So it's important to just pace it well. And it was chewed down to a pretty good little group, like 4 or 5 people in the first couple hours. And then it just kind of fragmented from there and some back and forth with some people. And like I said, I just rode my own pace all day. I didn't really feel any stress or pressure. I've had some good showings there in the past. And with it being wet, like I wiped out once, but my big goal was just to not get hurt because I didn't want to come into the fall or off season injured. Plus, I don't have health insurance, so I'm really not trying to get hurt because it's expensive for me. It was a good time. Rode with a number of fun people. Nick Bragg from down in Asheville, super nice guy. We spent a good part of the day together. Rode with Jordan for quite a while, especially kind of the long slog from South Trails up to Negaunee. And then from there in Ramba, I pretty much just rode by myself the whole time, crossing paths with people along the way. But it was a good day. It got pretty nice in the afternoon. It turned out to be pretty picture perfect later in the day and the evening. And, once I finished, I just hang out, try to get some food, nutrition, and feel decent. And then I typically go track Jenny down out there, like at the Negaunee, like Jackson Park aid station, and make sure everything's good for her, and then just cruise around the course. And I think wrap the day up around 5 a.m. Sunday.
It's definitely a long day. What is the toughest part of the race course?
I guess it depends on what your skills are or what suits you, because some people might say certain trails, but I rather enjoy the more technical stuff. I would say for most people, just because it comes so late and because it's tougher terrain, is everything from Jackson Park on, all of the Ramba trails, they're fairly relentless, and I think by then most people have burned more matches than they need to. And that's where you see a lot of people start to flounder or some serious attrition. And, the last 15 for a good majority of people is it's either getting dark or it is dark, which adds to the difficulty. So,
That seems to be what I hear from everybody is as soon as it gets dark, it seems like that last 15 is about that time, just like you said. And with the terrain as tough as it can get in the dark, that combined just I think a lot of people drop out at that point of the race too, from what I've heard.
yeah, I'd say so.
How many times have you raced, Margie?
Every year. So
Every year?
7. Yep.
Okay. What year has been your favorite and why?
The first year, that's an easy question because I kind of have a fondness for like smaller gathering events that I wouldn't say they feel more pure or anything. I think just there really were no intentions or expectations. And so people came into it just open minded and maybe underprepared and it made for the most fun adventure. And that course will never be replicated, I think, with what it's become today. There's just too many people to kind of do what we did the first year. But to me, that was my favorite. I mean, it was also beautiful weather. I think finishing up on top of Jasper Knob was super cool. That crew that was just hanging out there, Todd and friends, just to welcome us at the end. There was just something about that year. I think now there's a lot of hype, which is part of the vibe, and there's that's its own energy, and there's a lot of talk about buckle this and buckle that, and I think it takes away in some ways like from the experience of riding Margie. That probably sounds a little crotchety, but I enjoy riding the trails. I mean, I always ride hard, and I'm out there to get to the finish as quick as I can. It's important to like look around and take it all in because it's a really cool experience.
Was the first year was that course tougher? Is that kind of what you were getting at than the rest?
I wouldn't say it was tougher. I mean, it was tough to navigate because there really weren't a fraction of the signs there are today. So you really had to rely heavy on GPS, and if you weren't good at it, like a lot of people got lost or skipped parts of the trail, which happens in that type of a situation. But I think it was just cool because we started in a tiny little parking lot that's, if you're familiar with the area, in the Harlow Lake unit. There's a little parking area on 550, the main paved road that heads up to Big Bay. And it's, I would say, barely big enough for like maybe 40 or 50 cars. Like we were pretty packed in there. And the Le Mans, like we ran to our bikes in a couple hundred feet and like literally went straight into the woods. It was pretty neat because we went along the lakeshore path for a hot minute to get to South Trails, which was kind of different. It was just one that like I said, I don't think will be replicated in the future. So it kind of has that fondness. There's some trails that no longer exist. So there's that aspect to it too. But I just
Nice.
thought it was, really neat. It'll kind of always be in my memory as the favorite one.
Heck yeah. You mentioned getting lost and Harlow Lake came up during that last little bit there. First time I've ever been to Harlow Lake was this year. And I was with a guy that is good with reading GPS and knowing where it's pointing. But even that area, it seemed to glitch every now and then and get stuck, his GPS pointing away. And we got lost probably 3 or 4 times in Harlow Lake just because and then we'd start riding and the GPS would adjust and he's like, oh well, we're going the wrong way now. And we'd have to turn around and kind of go back. And that area just seems because there's so much rock, hard to follow the path. You can't just I don't know, I couldn't just see where the path went all the time.
Yeah, it's tricky to navigate. At least there's some signs there now. There were for a long time just zero signs indicating like where a trail was or where it started.
Yeah.
And so now there's some start and stop signs for trail indications, but it's definitely tricky because people go up there and they hike and they go to various little overlooks or rock spots. So they kind of beat in a little trail. And
Yep.
you mentioned it's rock and there's grass growing between it. So it's not always obvious where the path is, but that's some of my favorite riding up there. I think it's super cool and it just feels the most natural out of basically any of the trails that are in the event or in the area.
Yeah, I had a really good. I mean, even though we got lost, it was a great experience to ride those trails because it's something. I've never ridden on that much slab before. It was actually really cool, and I want to go back. Maybe we should go back with someone who kind of knows the trails to so we can maybe flow a little better, cuz when you get lost, sometimes you're in like a rough spot to start pedaling again and you got to walk. I don't know if you know what I mean, but
Yeah, it definitely makes it tricky. I mean, it's one of those things where like skills like track standing or, minor like trials, hopping or adjustments really helps for riding stuff. So you can kind of pause on the bike, look around and then resume riding. So
yeah,
and those are handy skills you can practice anywhere. It doesn't have to be up on trails like that. You can practice them at home, riding around the city or whatever you got around you.
absolutely. What is your favorite mountain bike race to do in Michigan and why?
Just stick with the trend. I'd say Margie Gesick, just because of I love the trails. I like the area. I like the people that are involved, and just the general vibe of the community is super cool, super welcoming. I mean, there's some other fun races in Michigan that have been around for quite a while too. But I think for me, what I enjoy the most, like really tough trail, I'd say Copper Harbor's Trail Fest is right up in there.
Okay.
That's kind of morphed and changed over the years, but that also is along those lines of just a super neat. It's a lot of technical riding depending on what event you're doing, and it offers something that really you can't get anywhere else in the state. Those two kind of right up there.
I think I'd like to get up to that Copper Harbor Trails Fest next year or the year after. I've heard a lot of good feedback on that. I think Margie's just too much for me, personally.
Yeah, if it's not the riding you're into, or you don't have this deep burning desire to do it, I think it's a tough thing to get done. Or if you're not into, like, if you don't have the skills being out there for 20 hours, like some people don't have that desire to do a bunch of walking and just put the time in it takes to wander through it at all costs. I always tell people, at least aim, if you want to do it, start with the 50, see what it's all about. It's still a big commitment at whatever 60 some miles, but they really should just call it like the Margie 100K, because it's never really seems to be near 50, whereas the 100 is usually not far off, like 105, 106. So
Yeah. Kind of like Polar Roll. Whenever I've done that, it always seems to be a few more miles than what they're calling it. It's just their
yeah,
style, right?
exactly.
Are there any other recent events that are challenging like Margie that you've done?
That was basically how I built my season, was doing all more challenging mountain bike races versus just endurance gravel, which has been the past few years. Vapor Trail 125 and Salida. I wouldn't even really say it's similar. It's just totally its own thing. That race is quite difficult, but also rewarding. Butte 100 out in Montana is another 100-mile mountain bike race. It's got several thousand more feet of climbing than Margie. It comes in bigger chunks, but it's kind of a in your face race. Feels a little bit in the middle of nowhere, which is sweet. And yeah, events like that have been kind of the focus of my year.
Cool. So maybe if people like Margie, they can look into those and add those to their calendar.
Yeah. Yeah, that Vapor Trail one kind of had a few years off because they had, I mean, of course, COVID, everything did a little bit, but there was a huge rock slide on the course that blocked it up. And
Oh,
they didn't really want to change the course. Like, the course is the course. I'd had it on my agenda to do sometime, and then it was off for a few years, and I wasn't sure it would come back. But then more recently, it's back. And that's a super grassroots. I mean, it's like you start at 10 p.m. in Colorado. You're at 7,000 feet, and you go right up to like 12,000 feet pretty quick. It climbs about 8,000 feet in the first 40 miles, and
oh,
it's got some real technical climbing just due to the steepness and the rocky nature of the course. Some mandatory hike a bike, and it's all mostly at night. And so you ride up at elevation, it's around freezing. So you got to contend with the weather, if it storms or if it's wet. Pretty low key. You start right in downtown Salida on the F Street Bridge, if you've ever been there, in front of the big S on the mountain. And then you finish at a little bike shop, which is super cool. Just not a lot of hoopla. You just go ride your bike with some like minded people, cool aid stations, and just a ton of big mountains.
sounds fun. I like when you say the word mountains.
Yeah.
At this point in your life, would you rather race your bike, chase a good KOM, or go on an adventure ride?
Adventure ride for sure. I enjoy racing for the certain aspects that it brings, like the added challenge. I like the camaraderie. Certain races I definitely shoot to get a certain result or whatever, but generally speaking, I mean my style, I'm not a super type A person where I like need to collect trophies like Pokemon or anything like that. I really just ride my races, especially ones like the Margie or the Vapor Trail. Like I stick to riding my style, my pace, and kind of go as hard as I can go and just see, where the cards fall type deal. But adventure rides I like because during races I end up, if you're up near the front or whatever, it gets really spread out. You ride a lot by yourself, and so it's a little bit different experience. But adventure rides, you can go out with your buds, and you just kind of ride an agreeable pace, and you can do all kinds of the same crazy stuff. You can do something like Margie esque, but then spend the time with good friends and relive it later on. And I just like going out and exploring new stuff too, seeing new trails, trying to find routes through places where it looks like maybe there isn't one. That stuff is rewarding to me. So,
This year, I don't know, I've kind of had a little change of mindset with that, and I'm the buds call and say, let's go do this. I'm more down than I have been in the past, where in the past I would be like, hey, I got to do some specific stuff this week for this race, right? And now it's just like, yeah, let's go do that because it's more fun. I
yeah.
agree. Let's go back in time a little bit. And why don't you tell us when you got started on the bike and how did that happen?
Since I was a kid, I've always liked biking more than just the average kid, I would say, as far as getting around from a young age. Like I had a motorcycle and I enjoyed doing that and rode moto with my dad. My mom had a three wheeler, so we'd go out and ride as a family. And then, yeah, I got like a dirt jumping bike, like an old Schwinn. Ride that around, jumps, taking it off of stuff. I got hurt a few times doing that, of course, and learned all about broken bones at an early age. And I think I got my first nice mountain bike when I was maybe 11, like a Cannondale with the fatty head shock. Pretty sweet bike I had saved up for, I don't know, a long time, a year or so, like whatever I could scrimp together and got this bike. And I was super proud of it, real stoked on it. And yeah, I always liked riding. But in high school and college, I ran mostly just because that was more beneficial for time. And there was no mountain biking when I was in high school as far as like a mountain bike team. And I didn't have anybody to expose me to like getting into doing events. Like, so I rode a lot. I mean, in high school before I really could work when I was too young, I would ride 4 or 5,000 miles a year roughly on a road bike. I had like an old steel Trek, I think 320. I still have the frame. And I would go out and ride. I go to my grandma's house. It was like 10, 15 miles away. I just go ride in the countryside, mountain bike around where I could. And then, yeah, fast forward to, I think it was after college when I finally had a real job and I could kind of afford a bike. I mean, I spent money I probably shouldn't have, but I got a nice Gary Fisher Hi-Fi Deluxe when it was just still Gary Fisher. They weren't owned by Trek. And that kind of then reopened that gateway to, like, I went up on this trip and rode a bunch of trails like Yankee Springs, Big M. I went and just camped out of my car and rode these trails, and that kind of from there, I think, set me on the path to really wanting to get more into it. Not necessarily for racing, just for riding, because I always just enjoyed it. And I didn't really start racing a lot until 13 or 14 years ago was when, like, I actually got really into racing, road racing, things like that. That's when I kind of took it seriously, if you will. And ever since then, it's just been racing a lot every year and enjoying it.
To go back, what kind of motorbike was your first motorbike? Just out of curiosity.
Honda CR250.
A 250. Okay.
Sorry, 50. I was thinking my dad had a CR250. I had a CR50. It was before my fourth birthday. I was 3 and almost 4. And so I got a 50cc. And my dad had a 250, and my mom had a Honda three wheeler. So
You guys could all go out together. That's cool.
Yeah.
When you started racing, road racing was first. Is that correct?
That happened before everything. I did a little bit, like my first mountain bike race was Ore to Shore right around kind of that same time. I dabbled a little bit, but road was, what I had good access to.
You ran in the past. Did you do anything else other than running and biking, or is that pretty much it for sports?
No, I wrestled for a long time, just like collegiate style. But I started wrestling, yeah, when I was, I don't know, 11 or 12, somewhere in there, and did that until college basically, and then it wasn't something I like wanted to pursue at a collegiate level because I went to a private. I did engineering. I went to a private engineering college that didn't have any sports. That's where I just ran on my own volition from there.
So don't mess with Matt because he'll put you in a wrestling move.
Yeah, I'm probably too skinny for that now, but I guess I was skinny when I wrestled too, so who knows?
Right? They're always trying to get you to be as light as possible.
Oh yeah.
What was the best investment that either you made in yourself, maybe a parent made in you, family member, or friend that's been the most beneficial to you along the way to get you to where you are today?
Focus it in on just cycling or just like my life? Like,
Cycling.
okay, so cycling, I would probably say, it started early with my parents, getting that little motorcycle, just learning how to handle a bike from a very young age, kind of taking away that fear of things that some kids, you develop, I feel like your fear reflexes early on in life. Like if you are nervous and afraid of things from a young age, it's kind of hard to overcome the later you get in life. If you're an adult and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I want to try riding huge drops or massive jumps, and you've always been timid about it, I feel like it's a lot harder to overcome than if you're like 7 and you're like, oh, I'll ride my bike off this thing, and just see what happens, like, because you don't really think of the repercussions when you're young. And so I think being into moto and riding like a dirt jumping bike and stuff from a young age, served to help with a little bit of fearlessness and just good handling and good all around like motor skills.
And when you're young, you're closer to the ground. Falls don't hurt as much. You don't have as much weight going into that clavicle, right?
Yeah, that's true. I feel like bones are just a little bit softer too, not quite as brittle. So
Yeah. Yeah, they flex a little bit instead of snap.
yeah, but yeah, my parents were always super supportive, and if I wanted to do something, they'd do their best to help accommodate it. Like we didn't have a lot of resources when I was growing up, but if like I wanted to go do a bicycle, I like did some bicycle tours at an early age. There's a ride that still goes on called One Hell of a Ride out by Hell, Michigan. It's a bicycle tour, not a race. And I had just saw a flyer in the bike shop because this was really before internet was huge. Saw it and it was like, oh, they had advertised that they actually had like a dirt gravel off road tour, which I think is kind of funny now because this was 1994 or five or something, and they were already talking about come do our gravel tour, and look where we are today. But my parents went and took me there, because obviously I couldn't drive, and I rode it, and they met me at a lunch stop, and I didn't really know anybody, but I just wanted to ride it. And this is pre GPS and everything, so it was like finding routes and stuff wasn't as easy as it is today. I did a tour up by Midland, was my first century when I was 11, and on that road bike, I didn't really know, what I was doing. I didn't know about chamois butter or nutrition by far, so I'm pretty sure I probably just bonked my way through it. The good old days, I guess.
That race you mentioned, is that coming up still this year or is that already done?
Which event?
You said something about the road to hell. Is that what you said?
Oh, no, no, no. This is called One Hell of a Ride. It's a
One.
bicycle tour.
Okay, one hell of a
It's
ride.
been going on for like 30 years. Anything now other than that tour is its own thing. So
Okay. Did you ever look up to anyone on the bike? Any idols or pro riders?
I actually watched the Tour de France when I was young. I enjoyed watching it when it was just on regular cable.
Yeah.
It was kind of the era where Lance was coming up, and I was kind of into Lance, but I think as a kid, I liked the antagonist maybe a little bit more. Like Jan Ulrich was a big German powerhouse, and then Marco Pantani was probably my favorite. He had that Italian flair. He was feisty. He could climb like a banshee. And I think not that I knew anything back then or could foresee what would happen with Lance, but there was just something about, I think that, he was so dominant. It was almost like too much storybook that I guess as a kid, I wasn't that really into it. I mean, it was cool. It was like, oh, yeah, the USA, like, nice job. But I think I liked the underdogs more and I liked watching that. And I used to get like mountain bike action magazines, so like Net Overend, Missy Giovi, Tinker Juarez, who still races a ton, and I've had the pleasure of racing with many times, which is a cool thing. See them on covers of magazines in the '90s, and then boom, he's at races I go to, and folks like that.
Yeah, that's
Kind of
super
that
cool.
era, the '90s.
You saw this guy growing up and now you get to race with him. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Since we're back in the day, maybe you can think back to your first ever race, could be road or mountain or whatever it was, and walk us through that experience. Did you have a lot of nervousness? Were you calm? How'd that go?
The first race I ever did, I think officially it was Ore to Shore, and I just did the 48-mile right off the bat. I think I've always been one just to do whatever was like the longest offered distance, and more or less because it seemed like the best value and what the most people do. And I rode a 26-inch single speed because that Gary Fisher I bought got stolen outside of my place, and so to get a mountain bike together, I just got this 26-inch frame off eBay, and it didn't have disc brake tabs in the frame, so I just ran a front brake, old Hayes disc brake, and built it up nice and light, simple, cheap. I probably had like 400 or 500 bucks into that bike, and went and raced Ore to Shore. I mean, I kind of knew what I was doing, but I kind of didn't as far as like racing tactics, blah blah blah. I just was like, I want to go out and do this ride, but I also wasn't as much focused on at that point in my life, like where I was in the pack. It was just like a personal adventure. I don't remember much nerves. I've never been a super nervous person when it comes to racing. I think because I enjoy it and I try not to feed that anxiety or overthink it. Just go out and do it. And yeah, it was a cool race. I remember riding it on that bike, and I don't think I had any issues. I had a good ride. I want to say it was a pretty nice day. It was hot at the finish. I remember that, and it was just a cool experience. Like, and that kind of set the hook there.
Hot. That's rare up there for that race, it seems.
Yeah, over the years, I feel like there's been a few like dried, and hot is relative, I guess. It's probably like 80. When you're out in that red dirt and it's blazing down on you on those power lines, like it seems a lot hotter and your pores are all clogged with dust. And I think I still have a picture somewhere like the skunk helmet stripes on my head after the race. And yeah, like dirt all over my face from breathing it in. But that one was sweet.
That's interesting that you really don't have nerves. I think a lot of people want to tap into whatever superpower you have there to keep yourself calm before a race.
There gets to be like a little bit there. I mean, and it's more, I think I usually feel an expectation from others to perform at a certain level than I do myself. I try to be fairly laid back, and I never put a ton of pressure on myself or more than I think I need to be motivated. But if you do like, a certain way at a certain event, then people tend to like expect you to do that the next year and the next year and the next year. So if anything, I'll feel that when I go to races, especially like the bigger ones. A lot of people ask you like, "Oh, are you going to win it?" Or like, "Oh, is this going to happen?" And I try not to be a jerk, but I'm usually just kind of like, I don't know.
Right.
I'm just going to go out and do my thing and see what happens. And I appreciate, that people are into it and everything. So it's not a bother. It's just,
Yeah.
it just kind of comes with the territory, I guess.
I was just listening to someone else, and Sean White, you know who he is, the snowboarder.
Yep.
Before his last gold medal, there was someone that asked him, "How you feeling right now? What do you want the outcome to be?" And he just said, I just kind of say, "Who cares?" And then I go do my thing. And he just says that helps keep him relaxed. So just go have fun, and who really does care? Just do your thing, right?
Yeah.
So this year you did some longer, tougher races, and wondering if before that, during your base building for these races, if you do that kind of thing, how many hours would you work up to in a week?
My training is pretty dynamic. Like I don't, even though I coach people, I myself don't work with a coach. My lifestyle is kind of hectic. There's always things to work around or work that pops up because you can really work anytime, all the time. And so I just kind of train dynamically. I have a rough idea in my head that I want to build up. I don't just like wing it. And I'll kind of lay out like rough notes of like, oh, I want to do this, 2 or 3 week build, or like the races out west this year, I went out several weeks early. So I would acclimate, but it build up to usually my weeks don't exceed 30 or 40 hours of riding. I try to culminate with like 1 or 2 really big weeks because that tends to work for me to like elicit a good training response out of that. I mean, my low weeks usually don't go any lower than like maybe 10 or 12 hours if I have a lot of work or something like that. I generally ride pretty solid volume.
Yeah.
And I look at more at hours than I do miles because of the type of riding that I do. Like I've had weeks that are out west and they'll be like 30 plus hours and maybe only 200 miles. And then if I'm at home, you can have weeks that are like 400 or 500 miles and less hours. Just kind of depends on where you're at, I guess.
I do the hours too, because I try to stay off the road, so I try to stay on the mountain bike more, and it's just a little slower. And then, like you said, if you're going up to Marquette or if you're out west, you're going even slower because the terrain's a little more technical. So I like hours as well. What has been your most memorable race on the bike? And can you walk us through that race?
Man, that's tough. I'd probably say Trans Iowa, just because it's like seared in my memory of the experiences of the ride, just how hard it was, and at times how miserable it was. Um, for people, it's not a race anymore. It's been retired, but Trans Iowa was this grassroots race that was pretty peculiar. I mean, only people in like the endurance community, I think, really knew a lot about it. If you're familiar at all with like Guitar Ted, or I think I don't want to misquote this, but maybe Gravel Cycling is the website he's behind. His name is Mark. He's out in Iowa, but he's been putting on these gravel events since the early days, and most of them for free. And Trans Iowa was like a postcard event, but it was pretty particular. Like you had to fill out your postcard a specific way to get it considered for this event. Like it would have rules and things you had to write on the card, and if you didn't do it, your card got thrown away. And they do like a lottery where you just literally stir these cards up and reach in and pull names out because you only allowed, I think, 100 people to do it every year. It's an event that was in April in Iowa, so you can guess, kind of like Bear Roubaix, the weather can be anything. This particular year that I did it, maybe 2017. I can't quite remember, but it rained a lot, like inches leading up to it. Thankfully, the race started at 4 a.m. It wasn't raining at the start, but within several hours of daybreak, it just started raining and it never stopped for 30 hours that we were out there. I want to say that year, 6 of us finished total, maybe six, maybe only five. I think maybe the six was over the cutoff. The cutoff was like 10 mile per hour. So I want to say it was like 36 hours or something like that because it was around 350 or 360 miles. It was Q sheets only. There was no GPS. You didn't know the route ahead of time. You didn't know where stops were. The only thing he would tell you is that you'd have to cover 110 miles without resupply. So that's all you would know about where you would get stuff. And it would just be like Casey's or whatever. They didn't have aid stations. And there was like one checkpoint, like mile 170. And it was like you had to get there by a certain time or he recommended you didn't continue type of deal. These Q sheets he gave you like the day before. So you couldn't like sit there and study them. You just put them on your bike and it was like you just follow the route. You didn't know where you were going or where you'd be. And it was super hard race though. It got really cold at night. It snowed, and we're soaking wet. And he used a lot of B roads, which it's kind of like that the mid South where like they don't have gravel in them; they're just farm dirt. And so when water hits them, they just fall apart. You can't ride them; it just sticks to everything. And so there's a lot of that in this race. A lot of walking. I remember stopping at a Walmart to buy dry gloves, and the next morning, and it was just a really, really tough experience. I mean, I wanted to quit. I didn't really know how to go about doing it because I didn't know where I was or like how to contact Jenny because my phone didn't work and everything was soaking wet. Yeah, I'll always remember that ride.
That sounds brutal. Especially when you just mentioned that you couldn't contact anyone to quit. You just had to keep going.
Yeah, I'll never forget. I was riding with this other guy, and it bugs me that his name escapes me. Really nice guy out of Colorado. He was into doing these long rides, and we were riding together. He couldn't really see well because he had gotten so much mud in his eyes. He kept going the wrong way. And I couldn't use my hands for zippers or food or anything anymore. And so he was helping, like, if I needed my jacket adjusted or like open a candy bar for me. So we're kind of like this, codependent duo. And we stopped at this hay barn off the side of the course. There was nothing around just to get out of the wind and the rain for a minute. And I really wanted to be done with it at that point, but there was no way for us to contact anybody. I remember him just being like, well, let's just keep going. So that's what we did and got it done. But yeah, that was a really, really rough one. So now anything that's like wet or rainy or cold, unless it's over 400 miles, it doesn't seem that bad.
Yeah, I could see that. We're going to switch gears and talk about kind of the same thing, but maybe in the past, what ride with a group, solo, could be a backpacking trip on the bike was the most memorable? And can you kind of paint a picture of that experience? Because I know those can be really fun.
I guess just an adventure ride. The best one I've ever done by far was doing the Baja Divide with Jenny. It's San Diego to Cabo, roughly 2,000 miles. And her and I did that within a couple of years of being married. And well, actually, I think within a year and a half of being married, and spent, over a month out there, just the two of us. We crossed paths with others pretty seldomly. So we just had each other to hang out with and talk. And that was just an amazing trip. It was like the longest trip I've ever taken bike packing. I think we spent 34 days on route. Just the experience of that, of like not having to worry about, I wasn't working at the time, so not having to worry about, what would be there for me when I came back or like what was going home. I just didn't care. Like I could just be fully invested in the adventure, spending time with Jenny, and the whole experience. And for me, that's the best. That was my favorite.
I remember seeing your posts when you were able to post on that and just watching the journey, and that was cool to watch. And I think after that I actually bought a book of I can't remember what it's called. It's something like best bike packing trips in the world with different routes. I can't remember the name of the book, but it has all these different cool must do's, around the world. So that was inspired by you for me to get the book.
Sweet. Yeah, it's doing that. I mean, we really haven't done an adventure even close to that long since then, but I've had the itch now. It's just life has become busy and like it is for, 99% of people. And
Yeah.
but I'd really love to go out and do like the Great Divide mountain bike route someday, tour it, not race it, do it
Yeah.
with a friend or with Jenny or whoever, and just to kind of do another experience like that because I think it's a pretty neat thing to do. And especially if your life is, generally busy all the time, I think you need to get away and do things like that are just totally immersive and kind of helps like frame things up. And you can get caught in like your ruts or being overly concerned about things that don't matter that much, in your everyday to day life. And getting that perspective, going and doing an experience like that is valuable.
100%. I think it's a great reset. I think it's a great time that people can do and reflect on life. And maybe I shouldn't spend so much time doing this. I need to do more of this. I don't know. I think I've seen some other people and heard from some other people too it might not be mountain biking, but something similar where you're getting away from the hamster wheel, so to speak.
Yeah.
Who has been your biggest competition along the way on the mountain bike? And maybe think back to a race where you went head to head and talk about the strategy or maybe lead changes and moves to get away, maybe how that race went.
I'm more of like a ride my own race kind of guy. I won't, generally speaking, I won't ride somebody else's race. So I'll either just let them go if they think they have it, or I'll, keep pushing beyond if I think I have it. If I had to pick a person, I'd probably say I've had that experience several times with Jordan Wakely. I had Iceman several years ago and Alexi won it. We were all in the lead group. And when Alexi made his move, people went after that. And it was just kind of like the pace got so high. It was just like you were riding just as hard as you possibly could. And that's where you were. And Jordan and I happened to be by each other most of the way in for the finish of that race, which was fun. And we've done some fat bike races where, it's come down to a sprint, like up at Crystal Mountain. There's one year I won the sprint, the next year he won the sprint.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that kind of camaraderie. And he's a super nice guy. Had some good times riding with him, like I said, at Margie this year. I guess I'd have to pick him. I feel like we've duked it out a number of times.
That's who I thought you were going to pick because when I replay some of the races, you almost touched on the ones that I remembered as well. The fat bike ones for sure. I do remember, I think there were back to back years where, I mean, if you looked at the time, you guys had the same time, but you won one year and I think the next year he won, or it was vice versa. And it was really cool to kind of watch you guys go back to back and battle it out.
Yeah. Yeah, that stuff is fun, especially when it's somebody you enjoy racing against.
Heck yeah. Why do you love the sport of biking and what keeps you going?
I really like all aspects of it. I like using the bike. I have like a single speed commuter. I use it as transportation around. I live in the city of Grand Rapids, and 99% of the time, if you're going anywhere in the city, it's easier just to go there on a bike. So I love it for the transportation aspect, for the ability and the flexibility, just to kind of go. It's not like a car that's like reined into roads and turning here. With the bike, you can hop on a sidewalk, you can go down an alley, you can go down a trail, you can carry it upstairs. It doesn't really matter. So I like that part of it. And for me, I think it's like the biggest thing is just, the bike is like my release. It does a lot for my mental health, I guess. Really my main reason, even if I wasn't to race or anything, like during 2020, there really wasn't any. I think I did one race that year. I didn't stop riding. I didn't ride any less. I rode the same amount as I always do because it's like taking a vitamin every day for me. Like I go out and I ride, and if I'm having a rough day, it makes me feel better. If I'm having a pretty good day, it enhances it. And I like what it does for health. I love seeing people getting out and enjoying, cycling, whether it's like a route that's out there for free or an event or a challenge that's been put out on the internet or any of those things. I just think it does a lot of good. It's a good thing for people to be into. And I hope that as things continue to change, gas goes up or it's just more expensive to own cars, that people don't rule out using a bike, and that cities accommodate that too.
I agree with that. I like that. I also agree with and it doesn't, for me, it just needs to be exercise. But if I don't do something every day or at least every other day, I can tell that, like you said, I need it for like my vitamin. And if I'm in a bad mood and if I go ride a mountain bike trail, I'm in a good mood afterwards. So it does something to enhance my mental state as well. So for those of you out there that don't ride a bike, maybe you should consider trying it out because it'll put a smile on your face.
Oh yeah.
Changing gears again, do you incorporate any strength training?
I do, not as much as I would like to, but at least once a week I try to get something in. And I see a chiropractor friend who also is an expert at strength training and things like that. So he helps steer what I do based on what he sees is going on with my body, whether it's like weak hips or something with my lower back. And so I have very great access to like basically a private gym and a person that can tell me, even if I'm heading on the road and I don't have a gym, like what to do to keep my body healthy. And every year I tell myself in the winter, like, and actually last year I was pretty good about 2 or 3 days a week. I was doing a lot more structured core workout and things like that. And then I got a concussion and, sometimes you come back from stuff like that after several weeks or a month and all your habits have kind of tapered off. And so I kind of dropped it there, but I'm generally always seeking to do some, but could always do more.
Do you use a TRX at all?
No, it's just, and I hardly even use much for weights unless it's like some lower back type squats. Almost everything is just like with resistance bands,
Okay.
supplementing core strength. Like I have a bad shoulder, so continually trying to keep, that shoulder working as best as it can and stave off like any lower back, any of the common stuff with cycling, lower back, hips, you name it. So.
Yep. Yeah, you mentioned going down the road, but resistance bands are very easy to take with you, so that works out good.
Yeah, and you can even, I keep some 5 pound weights in the van with the right motions and exercises. It's like I'm not trying to bulk anything up, and my legs don't really need more direct strength per se. So just some 5 pound weights for like shoulder and like maintenance moves or go a long ways.
What bike of yours sees the most action?
The Warbird, my gravel slash road bike. I do a good volume of my training either on pavement or gravel roads just to limit wear and tear on my body. Like I mentioned, my shoulder isn't ideal and I often battle like carpal tunnel or like hand issues. And so too much mountain biking thrashes them pretty good. So I do, yeah, a lot of time on my Warbird.
Is the shoulder from a crash?
Yeah, I injured it quite a long time ago when I was a kid. Like I crushed the rotator cuff and the joint in there and it healed. But then since then, I've separated it like substantially, which really I've never tried to have it repaired, but half the people I've talked to said don't waste your time, just PT it the best you can. I've broken that collarbone a couple times. So it's just like kind of a hot mess, but it generally works pretty good. I mean, I keep the bike on the trail.
Do you use any pre-race or pre-hard workout supplements?
If it's like really hot, by really hot, I mean like over 100, I'll take a little bit of like prehydration mix. I'm fortunate that maybe it's just adaptation that I do pretty well out there. I don't need to go crazy with drink mixes and things like that more than, just the recommended amount. If I'm like getting ready for a long event, actually, I was starting the day before, I might have like this morning, I was drinking some fizz tabs if I feel like I need a little extra something, but I don't do too much.
And then during the race, do you have a go-to hydration mix?
I use a number of different ones. Sometimes it's whatever I have that's free, I can make work. If I'm buying, I've been liking that Scratch Super Fuel, like the 400 calorie one, and I like Martin. I rarely do a long race on just the exact same mix and flavor. I usually do multiple brands and flavors just to make it diverse so I don't get sick of one over another. And I don't really work with any particular nutrition sponsors for that reason because nutrition's, relatively speaking, it's cheap. And
Yeah,
like I like the flexibility of being able to use and drink and eat whatever I want.
long races having some different flavor, different mixture in is probably good because I can attest to longer events, even just for me, which aren't super long in your book, but getting sick of the taste, the stomach getting sick of the whatever it is, and just needing to change. So that
Yeah.
definitely makes sense. For recovery, do you have any supplements, devices, or exercises that you prefer to use after hard workouts or races, like yoga, stretching, massage, percussive therapy, anything like that, compression?
I do mostly like stretching, foam rolling, kind of old school. I have a tool that my chiro buddy designed. It's called a Mobi, but it's basically like a rigid plastic bar with a hook and then a big ball on the end of it. So you can like get into hips, you can scrape calves. In the hook, you can get like up behind your shoulder blades and stuff and work on that junk. when I'm busy, I do massages every week, and I see my buddy every week. So I have a pretty good regimen right there. And after hard workouts, I'll do like a recovery drink. I'll use like the Floyd's recovery protein because I've had a lot of that and I like it. It tastes good and it seems to give me what I need. And yeah, I just generally like sleep when I can get a lot of sleep. And I have a pretty flexible schedule. So if I need to sleep until 9 or something, I'll do it just to feel better.
What do you feel is the most important out of all those things after a hard workout or a race?
At the bottom line, you need fuel. So just eating right after you do anything, like I try to eat almost immediately or as soon as possible when I'm done with something, because that really helps, with your mood and things too. Like if you're starving and you're bonked after a race, it can make you not fun to be around. And so I try to eat as much food as humanly possible right away. And my stomach's generally pretty strong. So I can usually eat like a burger or something right afterwards or pizza or you name it. Yeah, and aside from that, just a little bit of light activity, I feel like within some period of time, after whether it's 12 or 24 hours, just moving, not being sedentary and letting like everything get really stiff.
Good advice, for sure. If there was one race in your past that you could do over, what race would it be and what would you have done differently?
That's a tough one. Really, the only thing I've ever quit was the Colorado Trail race last year, just because of my hands, and I don't know if there was anything I could have done really other than just walk to better that situation. But I don't really have any regrets with races, even if like I lost out on a sprint or something. I mean, I just view it as part of it. Like sometimes you persevere and other times cause you got to think, you put yourself in the other people's shoes. They're trying to do exactly what you're trying to do. And so sometimes it comes right down to that. And, it's hard to be sour about it. You just use it for fuel for the next time. And yeah, I think that's probably about it.
And was that was the carpal tunnel for that race?
Yeah, just like general nerve issues, and it's been kind of ongoing. But anytime you ride a bike on really rough stuff, I feel like for multiple days at 20 hours a day, like you're gonna have problems. So
Yeah. Yeah, if you do pretty much anything rough for 20 hours multiple days, I think you're going to have some issues.
yeah,
Do you do anything pre-competition to get yourself ready, motivated? Any music, rituals, or routines?
I mean, I used to listen to music or have things. Now I end up just like being busy, whether it's like if Jenny and I are trying to get somewhere or cook up a game plan, I usually find myself just doing stuff or fixing other people's stuff or just being like, I don't mind being busy. I don't need to sit and isolate myself for an hour and go full Zen mode or anything. Just kind of stay in the hustle and bustle and do my thing. But I've done a lot of hundreds and hundreds of races. So pretty fast and loose these days.
Yeah, that makes sense. You have any other events coming up on the calendar this year? And if you do, maybe explain a little bit about where and what they are.
Traveling to Unpaved, which is a gravel event in Pennsylvania this weekend. Been around for several years. A pretty cool race. It's in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. It's like a mountainous area, so it's got some pretty substantial climbs, like 1,000 to 2,000 foot climbs. It's got some rough roads, a couple sections it's famous for, and I think it's kind of unique because they've gone to like a segment timed model. Your cumulative time doesn't matter for the course; you just need to finish the course. They have like 6 specific sections ranging from like 3 miles to 24 miles that they time you on. And the total distance I want to say is like 40 some miles of actual racing. So I'm kind of excited about that. Just something different. And I don't really like getting up early. And so they have an open start window from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. I'm sure I'll
Oh,
be starting at like 8:58 because I don't like getting up early. So I'm just like excited for that laid back nature of it. I guess it's kind of along the lines of like Strava segment hunting, if you want to put it that way, or
yeah.
if you're familiar with enduro racing, it's kind of like a page out of that book. So
I kind of like that idea starting later too. I don't like getting up early to race either. I'm with you in that boat for sure.
Yeah, especially this time of year when it's cold. Like in the summer, it's one thing if it's like 65 or 70 in the morning, but if you wake up and it's like 35, it's like I'm not ready for that yet. So
No.
yeah, and do that. Maybe a big maybe on peak to peak. Kind of play it by ear, see what mood I'm in. Get kind of tired this time of year and try to give myself some grace and not race all the time or feel obligated to. And other than that, Iceman, just classic season wrap up. And that one too, I just kind of wing it. I don't really like do anything specific for it, or I would say I don't care about it because like I don't want to seem crass, but I don't put any pressure on myself to do a certain thing there. I just try to use whatever fitness I've gained over the year and I got my Tuesday gravel rides, which helps kind of sharpen the sword before short events like that. But that's really
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. And it's a good fun end of the season party anyway, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We go up there, group of friends and have a good time. And it kind of just puts a stamp on the end and helps to switch gears, into the winter and the spring seasons.
What trail would you recommend that is a must ride anywhere in Michigan?
Man, there's so many good ones, but, you know, accessible to like the biggest population in the state, I would say the North Country Trail from Red Bridge to Marilla, I think is an amazing trail that most anybody can ride. Great scenery, nice climbing, just a beautiful zone in the forest. I think, it's whatever, about 9 or so miles and once again super approachable. I mean, there's other trails that I might like a little bit more, especially up in Marquette or the UP, but they're generally very hard trails that don't interest many people. So
Yeah.
I think that section of the North Country Trail is fantastic and has something for everybody.
And if it had a little more rock, you might feel like you're in maybe North Carolina or something because it's pretty hilly and it almost feels like you're in the mountains there, but there's just not enough rock on the trail.
Yeah, it's pretty though. And I think that's what makes it approachable too, though, is there's some roots and stuff here and there to keep you on your toes, but it's
Yep.
generally a pretty tame trail that anybody can enjoy.
And like you said, some good climbs too. Let's switch gears just a little bit and talk about maybe what made you decide to start organizing and running races.
That one's pretty easy. I mean, we've been putting on group rides or like that Tuesday gravel ride. I want to say it's like the eighth or ninth year of doing that now. Probably my longest standing thing I've hosted. But even when I moved to the West Michigan area and kind of got into a cycling group of friends I worked with, like after I got to know everybody, I wasn't hesitant to like say, hey, let's go do this ride or something, and maybe on this day. And it's kind of the most basic form of organizing an event, right? It's like contacting friends, saying, let's go do this ride on this date. There's food after, blah blah blah. And I've always enjoyed doing that. I think I have a good sense for like direction and route building and navigation and organizing. And yeah, Jenny and I left our jobs, like our careers in 2017. Yeah. And from there, I mean, it wasn't really like the focus. So, like, hey, this is what we want to do. We want to make our money off of putting on events. But that was the year we kind of cooked up the Michigan Gravel Race Series more as a little hobby project to kind of be more involved in the community. And also just something you saw kind of like a need for something to tie all these budding events together and try to give them kind of like the CPS series, back in the day would get a regular crowd out to all of the small events like Addison Oaks and ones that people might not otherwise go to. We kind of saw that with, potential for the gravel race series and, less about some high competitive thing with a bunch of money, more about just getting people out to these events to enjoy them regardless of experience or level and just build that community, help support those events. And along the way, like we were helping the Plights and the 10Ks with Bear Roubaix. Jenny had been making posters and stuff for them. And I helped them design the Psycho 100-mile route and kind of pitch that to them. And just started talking a lot more because I know at that point they were looking for fresh ideas. And, we go to a lot of events, we see a lot of things. and the relationship just kind of grew from there. And then, after some time, like Rick and Kathy approached us and said they were looking to retire. And so that's where Jenny and I came in and said, we worked out an agreement to take over their half of the company. And now we, do all kinds of events and different forms. And it's pretty fun.
You guys have done a good job, by the way.
Oh, thanks. We try to. We care a lot, so we want it to be a good experience for people, whether it's their first or their 1,000th race.
Heck yeah. Do you guys have anything new next year on the bike racing? Anything?
Nothing that we'll personally be hosting or necessarily being a part of per se. Kind of reached a point where we're pretty well laden with work between like the gravel race series goes on throughout the summer, and it's more just like scoring work, like social media work, which Jenny does, keeping tabs and all that stuff. A lot of behind the scenes, like emailing promoters and sponsors. Barrier Bay takes up a large amount of time. I mean, we just had a meeting yesterday about that and going over like a massive list of things to do and lumberjack and then our bike packing event. So we're pretty well inundated. And I help out with like coast to coast and a number of other events too. I was talking to Mark about that yesterday too, about some course stuff for coast to coast and a possible recon trip next week. So we've mused about it here and there, but I don't know if there's any more bandwidth. If I didn't race and ride myself, maybe, but I want to enjoy it too. So
Yeah, your plate's pretty full, I would say. If you were to give advice to younger athletes that look up to you, what would it be?
guidance I usually provide anybody that's getting into the sport is like to take their time and don't rush themselves into high expectations of going from 0 to 60, which is easier said than done for younger folks. And don't forget the love and enjoyment of the process and the events. And don't focus so heavy on results and those things. I think there's maybe in our society a little bit, people get pressured into like if they're not doing a certain result or meeting a certain expectation, that their experience is a failure or that they're not keeping up with everybody else. At the end of the day, it's like for very few cyclists out there, basically world tour riders, some of the top end, quote unquote privateers, it's not a livable long-term income and wage as a cyclist, unless, like I said, you've made that niche and you've really persevered on it and you're one of the top in the world. So it's like at the end of the day, it should be fun because it's basically a hobby, unless your whole income comes from cycling, it's a hobby, right? And so don't take it too serious and don't take yourself too serious, just enjoy it and like for what it is, whatever level you're at or however you enjoy doing it, don't feel pressured to by social media that your experience with the bike needs to meet certain requirements or you need to do certain things to be considered, a mountain biker or a gravel biker. It's like however you like doing it. If it's not killing anybody else's good time, just do it the way you want to do it and, keep it healthy, keep that relationship always kind of in the fun zone.
Keep it in the fun zone. I like that. To add on to that, is there a book, a video, an athlete, or a coach that you would recommend them to follow that they could maybe get some value from?
I'm bad about this. I don't like as far as cycling specific stuff. I think since my whole life is bikes, I rarely watch or listen or read anything to do with bikes as much anymore because it's just kind of my whole life every day. So I don't have any great recommendations there. I mean, I'm sure there's, just listen to some podcasts like this one that you're hosting right here. You can hear from different people, different perspectives, see what strikes a chord with you, what you find interesting. But yeah, it goes back to, like I said, the fun zone, like find whatever makes it really enjoyable for you and put that at the center of your cycling experience. And it could be results. It could be, that you generally just enjoy good placings, but, find something that kind of lines up with the whole reason you got into it, and that's how you have like a successful, long relationship with it. anything really, right? So,
Yep. Relationships, sports, whatever. Yeah. It's got to be fun. At some point, you got to keep it healthy and fun.
mhm.
Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we sign off?
I feel like we covered a lot of bases here. I mean, the last note we touched on, I think, is one of the things I always like to share with people, just talking about the enjoyment of the sport and not losing sight of why we ride bicycles, always keeping it fun when you're at events or you're out riding with other folks, like being cognizant of making sure you're enhancing somebody else's fun and having a good time. And that's kind of how we grow the sport. And you try to be a good example for like people there, not just young people, but anybody getting into the sport. Be welcoming, make spaces for that. I mean, not every ride needs to be a no drop group ride. I mean, mine certainly isn't to an extent. Participating in things maybe outside of just whatever narrow facet you might be into, whether it's racing, like, try to stay up to date on any initiatives within your township or your city that have to do with bike access or pedestrian access. And if there's any like youth programs or volunteer options, go out and experience different facets of the sport you love. Volunteering at an event, I see it all the time because I help host events, I go help at events, and people are like their first time if they have a meaningful volunteer role, they're always kind of blown away by like, holy cow, this was really cool. They get a feel for like the inside workings of what it takes to put something on, and the amount of stoke and gratitude you can get from helping out, helping somebody else's day be successful is pretty cool. So go out there and enjoy those other sides of cycling. Keep it fun. Don't forget why you ride. Not every ride needs to be a workout if you're into racing. I make those days where I just go pedal around the city. I might ride down some stairs or do some goofy stuff. And I don't care how far my route is or what it looks like. I might stop and I might have a coffee or a beer. And especially this time of year when the weather is fleeting, it's like make the most of it.
Well, I like all that advice. And personally, I like mountain biking, as most people know, but I like being involved with the younger kids, with the coyotes, and I like answering their questions, and I like teaching them skills and techniques so that they can be better. It just, it's kind of fulfilling for me, right? To see the kids ask the questions, you teach them, and then they're doing what you're telling them to do and they're getting better and they're excited about it. I really like that. So I think that helps me feel like I'm doing something to help the youth too. So I really like that aspect of it. And I think that was part of some of the stuff that you were talking about there.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. I mean, when I had the availability and the time, I helped out in the early days of like the Grand Rapids Dirt Dogs there at Canonsburg, and that was a super fun experience. And like I don't have children, but I've been around enough people with kids, or we have nieces and nephews to know that kids generally take advice and input better from anybody that's not their parents.
Yes. Yes.
So it's kind of cool to be able to help out, and even if the parent kind of tells you, give you has some heads up, like, oh, they like this or they're nervous about this, so you can know what to help them along with. It's a fun experience, yeah, like you said, because kids, arguably like pick up skills and grow faster than any other segment of the population. So they can just, when they're really into it, they can just excel, and but it's got to be fun and enjoyable too. So
And not from their parents, because I get a lot of parents that come up and go, they won't listen to me. Can you talk to them?
yeah.
Absolutely.
I still get that, even not, just in general. Somebody's like, hey, can you, my kid's this or that? Can you tell him like that he needs to recover or he needs to, you're like, oh, yeah, sure, I'll go over there. And like it
Absolutely.
comes from somebody else. And then they're like, oh, you know what? And it's funny because what cracks people up the most, like then you'll hear back from that person, like, yeah, they were basically repeating to me everything you told them was what I'd been telling them for years. But the minute it came from you, it was like, oh, yeah, this is what I got to do. Like,
Yeah. It's
but
pretty crazy.
yeah, whatever works. I mean, I was the same way when I was a kid. I think that's just the recipe, right? Like,
My kids
no way
don't listen
around
to
it.
me. Where can people find you on the web if they want to connect with you?
I would say I usually put any updates out or interesting stuff on Instagram. my handle is Attacker Acker. It's just a nickname I earned road racing, always attacking and getting after it out there. You can find, all of our events, our group is the Pavement Ends Incorporated. You can find like Bear Roubaix, Lumberjack, all those ones. Michigan Gravel Race Series. If you Google that, you can find it. Even if you're not into necessarily competing in the series or whatever, we put a calendar out there. Lots of helpful info on the events, the distances. It's a great resource. You can follow Jenny on Instagram as well, Butt Crack Jenny. Also a nickname she earned when she was younger, probably a pretty easy one to figure out. Yeah, that's where we're most active, not on Facebook a lot other than if there's some replies to make or, for work.
So find them on Instagram, and then you can search up any of those events in the Google search engine, and it'll definitely pop up. I've done it before. Matt, I appreciate all that you've done for the sport of mountain biking in Michigan. During the world shutdown, you kept people going with cycling challenges. I've looked up to you when I was a newbie, and I continue to do so. I wish the best for you in the future with racing and promoting. I'm grateful that you were able to take the time out of your busy schedule to come on here today and have this wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Rob. It was a fun chat.
Hey, that's my goal, is to always try to make it a fun chat. You have just listened to Unpacking the Athlete.